archive, in my computer archive, is that 17 years ago, a colleague from Hamburg asked me to write an article on Jewish music in Hamburg. I don't remember the name of the lady, I couldn't find it, but I found my notes of what I intended to write. I never wrote the article, and she was not very happy with me for not keeping up to my promise. But this is one of many promises that I broke because I never have enough time to write all what I would like to write. So I am glad that 15 years after, I have the opportunity to write the article online. At least it will be in YouTube with some of the ideas. I will respect my promise to Reinhard to speak about the Portuguese Jews, but I will expand, with your permission, the scope of the lecture. And you see in my title that I'm speaking about the Jewish-German musical encounters in Hamburg. And beyond the Sephardic mystique, it's a concept that I would like to explore with you. I wrote that book based on what I call the attraction of otherness. The book on the Portuguese Jews in Hamburg was based on a very small manuscript from the Birnbaum Collection. The Birnbaum Collection of Jewish music is located today at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, but originally is from Königsberg, not far away from Hamburg. And this document attracted my attention when I had the privilege to be working on the collection 40 years ago with my mentor and teacher, Professor Israel Adler. This is the way the manuscript look. I will get back to the manuscript in a few minutes. The attraction of the otherness is what explains the concept of beyond the Sephardic mystique. This is the book that Reinhard mentioned, and I will get back also to the picture in the middle, which is very significant. The Sephardic mystique refers, first of all, to a foundational article about the influence that the imagination of Sephardic Jewry meant to the scholars, German Jewish scholars of Wissenschaft, the Judenthums in the 19th century. I am only bringing you here two out of the relatively recent books written about this subject. When I wrote my book 30 years ago, the subject was not yet as developed as it is today. What this means is that German Jewry, particularly the elites, sort of projected their aspirations to integration in German society on the basis of the integration of the Jews in medieval Spain, in medieval Al-Andalus. Of course, there is a naive side to this perspective, an ahistorical vision of the past, but you know, the past is usable, and some of these ideas penetrated deeply into the work of the people in Wissenschaft and Judenthums, particularly in their interest, deep interest in Sephardic literature. And of course, in Hamburg, the situation was special because the Ashkenazi or the German Jewish intellectuals had just on the other side of the street some of the remnants of this Sephardic Jewry. The research on the Portuguese Jews in Hamburg, Altona, and I mention Altona because today is an integral part of Hamburg, but in the past was the other side of the river. And the history of German Jewry in Hamburg since the 16th century is a history that the more I studied is all the time about crossing the river. It's depending on the different political situations in the city of Hamburg itself. The Jews were allowed, not allowed. They were allowed to work, but not to have property. Sometimes they were allowed to have property. Sometimes they had to be buried on the other side of the river. So this constant lack of stability is what defines the Jewish experience in Hamburg. And the fascination that scholars have with this very small community, as you will see, is represented here. Just a very brief bibliography of a much larger bibliography on this phenomenon. I think that if you take per capita, there is much more written, 100 times more written about Portuguese Jews than Ashkenazi Jews in Hamburg. Particularly, I want to mention the name of my dear colleague, Michael Studemunda Levy, who has dedicated practically his whole corpus of scholarly research to the Sephardic Jews in northern Germany. What do we know about the music of these Portuguese Jews? Remember, the Portuguese Jewish settlement starts at the beginning of the 17th century to pick up. And in 1763, that is to say about more than 100 years of Jewish presence in Hamburg Altona, we have a magnificent document written by Jacob ben Joseph Acohen Belinfante, who was the cantor at this community. This is our first tangible evidence of musical information that we have from Hamburg. And this is his book, Mesilat Beit Israel, and this book is what we called in Jewish studies Seder Hazanut. Seder Hazanut is the order of prayers, not the liturgy performed in the synagogue, but in a way the manual that the cantor has as to how to proceed and how to do and how to perform the liturgy. And as you see, you have a beautiful decoration, simply because Belinfante was not only a musician, but he was also an artist, a visual artist. And this is one of the most beautiful manuscripts from Hamburg today at the Venzvi Institute in Jerusalem. And Mesilat Beit Israel is the name of the book because Beit Israel was the name of the Portuguese congregation. And I'll translate it for you what he says here in the short introduction in the title page. This book or this manuscript includes the traditional order of prayers for the whole year, melodies, nigunim, and praises from the last generations and from the early ones according to the Sephardic tradition of the Holy Congregation Beit Israel in Hamburg. It's written Hamburg here in the middle in big letters, Hamburgo, as you say that in Portuguese. And he gives, of course, praise to his father, who was still alive when he wrote this manuscript. Now, what does he mean by melodies? Well, this is what he means. He has, at the end of the manuscript, a list of melodies to be performed in the different parts of the liturgy. He doesn't bring musical notation, regretfully, so we can only guess what he had in mind when he wrote this part of the manuscript. You see here, I just choose one of the pages, Nigunim lekadish, that is to say, melodies that you can apply to the Kaddish. The Kaddish is the most recurring Jewish text in the Jewish liturgy. It's like the marker of the different parts of the liturgy. So every section ends with Kaddish, or is marked by the Kaddish, and the cantors have many melodies to perform this text. One of the melodies that we have here, just a second, it's a melody שהיו נוהגים לשורר בליל פסח באמסטרדם והיא מוקדמת עד מאוד. It is one of the melodies that they used to sing in the eve of Passover in Amsterdam, and it is a very ancient melody. So here we have, in a nutshell, the strong connection between cantors from Hamburg and from Amsterdam. Amsterdam is like the mother community of the Portuguese Jews. I assume that Hervé is going to talk more about that. So we see here the transfer of melodies from Amsterdam to Hamburg, the historical consciousness of a melody as being ancient. Now, not all the melodies were ancient. Here we have another melody, שחידש המשורר אורלי בוסקי בטובעי. That is to say, a new melody, not an old one, but a new one, that the composer, he calls him a meshorer, but he was a composer, Orly Busky wrote, and it is a very good one, a very nice melody. So we know to whom he is referring. He is referring to Conrad Friedrich Urlebuch, one of the fashionable composers of Amsterdam at the time, of which the Jews of Amsterdam knew his music, and they were able to borrow from his music and set up a melody for a Jewish Kaddish. Let's listen to a few bars of how the music of Urlebuch sounded, and then a real example, a real reconstruction of how this Kaddish may have been. I'm sorry. First of all, we can say that this type of music is the type of music that you could hear in a reception of the rich mansions of the Portuguese Jews in Amsterdam in the mid-18th century. Probably Urlebuch even performed in one of these big sumptuous mansions of the Portuguese merchant elite in Amsterdam. Some of these Kaddishim, some of these melodies were preserved in manuscripts in Amsterdam, and I will play for you a reconstruction of one of these Kaddishim performed by Chazan Jonathan Schutz. At the time, he was a student from the Jewish Theological Seminar in New York, in Jerusalem, a student of my wife, and we recorded some of these Kaddishim to which Belinfante is mentioning. And I will play it for you. Of course, the Kaddish is performed without musical accompaniment.
Yitkadal ve'yitkadash shemeh ובחייכון וביומכון ובחיידךו בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו Amen. Amen.
So a little taste of what you could hear if you came to Belinfante's Esnoga. That's the word, the Portuguese name for synagogue in Hamburg in the mid 18th century. Since when do we have some tangible information directly from Hamburg? Where here you have in front of you one of the first documents that we have with musical notation from Hamburg. This is a Kaddish. Once again, the Kaddish, a very important prayer, de la primera noche de cabañas. That is to say, as you can see, for the Esther Launhüttenabend, for the celebration of Sukkot. And here you have a very elaborate piece that appeared in the Allgemeine Zeitung des Judenthums. These transcriptions were prepared by Yehuda Casuto, who at the time was the cantor in Hamburg. And I want to show you, just from some of my other studies, that this Kaddish is basically a Baroque elaboration of a very simple melody from Amsterdam that you have here in the second line of this first system. This is a melody called the El Elim. It was very famous in Amsterdam in the 18th century, and the cantors used to elaborate using Baroque ornamentation in the synagogue. What is interesting is that this Baroque style still pervades in the Portuguese synagogue in the 19th century. Well into the Romantic period, we still have in the synagogue this Baroque type of ornamentation. Regretfully, I don't have the time to perform this, but you can find this in some other studies I have done on the Portuguese music from Hamburg. Here you have one of the important synagogues, Portuguese synagogues. This is the one on the Altona side, the Neve Shalom synagogue. It was closed in 1882, where there were no more enough Portuguese Jews to maintain it. It was used by the Ashkenazi community for a while as a study house. Here we have the Beit Israel Esnoga in Hamburg. This is the Esnoga, the synagogue that was established that was constructed, the new one, in 1855. And this is from a picture, a very rare picture of the synagogue. We have very, very few visualizations of this synagogue from an article on Ostum West of 1905. And this article is important for me because it celebrates, it's an article by Dr. Paul Rieger of Hamburg, celebrating the Jubiläum der Hamburger Portugiesen Gemeinde. In 1905, the synagogue celebrated 50 years of its existence, this new synagogue. But the attitude of Dr. Rieger is extremely what we call lachrymose. Look at what he, first of all, he mentions all the Portuguese Jews, and I just found nicely that he mentioned the Zeichner Jacob Belinfante. So you see the name of Belinfante was well known from these elaborated illustrated manuscripts. But look what he writes. Ist doch die ganze Geschichte dieser letzten portugiesischen Gemeinde auf deutschem Boden ein Lied vom Sterben. And finally he says, wie lange noch? Und in dem stimmungsvollen Betthause der Portugiesin verstummen die uralten, selbststam anmutenden Melodien, deren schwerblütige Akkorde vermutliche Träumereien und überernste Erinnerungen an die ruhmreichen Tage Israels auf dem Pyrenäischen Halbinsel auflösen. So we see here basically a very sad realization that this community is about to fade out, and the melodies play such an important role in the fading out of this community. With this, I end the chapter on the Portuguese Jews, and I will move quickly into other aspects of Jewish music in Hamburg. But the first one is still related to the Portuguese Jews, to the Sephardic musical mystique. Reform Judaism finds in Hamburg its first stage that pervaded, that continued until the 20th century. The first Reformed temple founded in 1818 in Hamburg is the only one who survived the early attempts of reform in Berlin were all the time being sabotaged by the Orthodox community. In Hamburg, the reform succeeded, and here we have the great temple in Pulstrasse, and here we go back to the Birnbaum Collection, Mus'ad 14. So what we have here is a fantastic development in which the Reform movement, seeking for the most authentic Jewish music they could find, while trying to move away from the old Ashkenazi German tradition, they simply engage the local Portuguese cantor. And the organist that was employed by the synagogue, Mr. Bethuel, he was the organist of the chief church in Hamburg. He transcribed from the cantor some of the traditional Sephardic melodies and arranged them for performance with keyboard accompaniment. I cannot go into the details of all this amazing development of the inclusion of very old Sephardic musical traditions into the Reform movement from all synagogues. However, I want to tell you that these are the oldest tangible evidence we have of Sephardic music in the whole history of Sephardic music. The first time we have a musical notation. I choose for you one piece, Ya Shema Evyonecha, which it's, in my opinion, one of the oldest Sephardic melodies. We have so much evidence, and the evidence that is so old is not because we have this in this manuscript, which is from about 1827, but it continues in oral tradition. My work was to sing all these melodies to Sephardic cantors living today, and they recognize all these melodies. That is to say that the transcription was accurate enough to be recognized also by Sephardic cantors in the 20th and 21st century. So you see the melody, la ri ra ra ri ra ri ra ri, la ri ra ra ri ra ri ra ri, la 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 ra ri ra ra ri, la ra 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 ra. Let's hear how this poem by the great Yehuda Halevi, the great medieval Sephardic Spanish Hebrew poet, that it's performed in the Sephardic ritus, in the Sephardic liturgy for Mincha, for the afternoon prayers of Yom Kippur. Here you have the choir of the Portuguese community in London performing this piece, this melody. sorry, I have to cut all these beautiful performances for the sake of time. Here you have another page of the same manuscript, the melody for Etz Chaim Il Amachzikim Ba from the Torah service. And once again, here we have an interesting melody that is used in Ashkenazi communities until this very day. You have all this information and deep analysis in my book. But the strong man in the Hamburg temple in the first Reformed Jewish community in Hamburg was Edward Kley, who was the preacher there for the formative years of the community, a very distinguished leader of the Reform movement in Germany. And he tried to transform the entire liturgy. In my opinion, Kley was not one of the most enthusiastic promoters of the Portuguese strategy, musical strategy. I think that I have to put the Portuguese influence on the Reform movement into a more limited influence. However, Edward Kley had other ideas about how music in the synagogue, the new music for the temple should sound like. He wrote many texts of many anthems, many poems. The music was published several years later in Kassel in 1832 in this book called the Kol Zimra in Hebrew, Gesänge zur Entweckung der Andacht und der religiösen Gefühls by the Israelitische Jugend. And here you have what the music that Kley thought that is proper for the new synagogue, a real Lutheran chorale, four-voice chorale with the texts written by him. Here you have Herr, nun dir allein vertrauen. This is one of Kley's most famous anthems. So we have here, on the one hand, the Sephardic Mystique, the use of very ancient Sephardic tunes vis-a-vis this Lutheran model of musical Bildung, of musical decorum, of participation of the entire congregation, particularly the youth, in the singing of the synagogue. The Portuguese melodies did not remain within the confines of the Hamburg Reform congregation. It was taken out to other Reform congregations throughout Germany. Here we have Hirsch Goldberg's Gesänge für Synagogen, Braunschweig 1843. My picture is from the Zweite Auflage of 1845. And you see here one of the most ancient liturgical structures of textual structures, not only musical. Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Imloch Leolam Va'ed. God is the king, God was the king, God will be the king forever and ever. And the performance here is between the Chazan and the Chor. So what we have is one musical phrase, la ra ri ra ra ra, la ra ri ra ra ra, da ra ra, li ra ra, la ra 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 ra, ri ra ra. 4 different sections, and then the Chazan have a recitative, and the choir responds each time with one of these short phrases. This is one of the most entrenched moments of the Jewish liturgy that remain forever. I just decided to play for you a recording. This is not a field recording, this is a YouTube recording of Selichot, of the early morning service of the month of Elul, in which you can hear the same structure and very similar melodic movement sung in a totally different style in Israel just a couple of years ago. you can hear exactly the same pattern. You see here the continuity, the power of the continuity of oral memory in one of the most sacred moments of the Jewish liturgy. Moving on into who came after the first generation of reform movement in Hamburg, Moritz Henle, one of the most important composers and choir conductors of German Jewish community. He served for a very long time in Hamburg between 1879 and 1913. Henle, you have here a family of the entire dynasty of Henle. Henle came from Laubheim, very, very south parts of Germany, and moved north to a very different environment. I can speak a lot about this picture. We don't have enough time, but I just want to play for you a little bit of how the music by Henle sounded. What Henle did is more or less he wiped out all the Portuguese tunes. He reintroduced the Ashkenazi pronunciation of Hebrew. The early reform adopted the Sephardic pronunciation, the Portuguese pronunciation. Henle made a step back, returning a little bit more to the tradition of the modern Orthodox synagogues of Germany. Let's hear Uvnucho Yomar, just a few bars from Henle's music. I'm sorry again that I have to cut for the sake of time. Another important personality, a little bit less expected perhaps in Hamburg, but an integral part of the soundscape of Jewish Hamburg in the early 20th century. While Henle was still the music Kapellmeister and choir conductor at the Reform Temple, the new Bornplatz synagogue in Hamburg, the Orthodox, hires who is perhaps one of the greatest Ashkenazi cantors of all times, Yossele Rosenblatt. And it's important to mention Rosenblatt today because he came from Ukraine. He was originally from Ukraine, and he made little by little his road west. First moving to Vienna to study, then moving to Pressburg, Bratislava as cantor, then moving to Hamburg, and then eventually spending the last time of his life in New York City. Here I found a very nice ketubah, a marriage contract from Hamburg. I found this on the internet on a Sotheby's sale of Jewish documents. What I found it very interesting is that one of the witnesses of this wedding is Yosef ben Moharar, Raphael Nero Yair Rosenblatt, Shatz Rishon ve'ed Ne'eman bekelat Kodesh Hamburg. That is to say, Joseph, the son of my teacher and my rabbi, Raphael, may he live a long life, Rosenblatt, Shatz Sheliach Tzibur, that is to say, representative or emissary of the congregation, that is to say, the cantor, Rishon, the first, the main cantor, and Ed Ne'eman, a faithful witness of the holy congregation of Hamburg. And in the Birnbaum synagogue, here you have one of the earliest pictures of the synagogue. While Rosenblatt is there, he records for audio record. So we have his voice at the time he is in Hamburg. Let's listen to the Shambru and pay attention to the style of Rosenblatt during this time. By the way, look at the way he looks here. He gained a lot of weight in America. Many people become more fat in America. And he also doesn't have at this time the thick glasses that he has in all his pictures in America. He looks very decorous, very German in a way, even though he has this big beard. And the voice also is the voice of an educated cantor, not the explosive tenor voice virtuoso that we will hear in later periods. This is the Shambru, as you may have heard Rosenblatt singing in Hamburg in 1908. Sorry that I have to interrupt this amazing recording 1908, Rosenblatt in Hamburg. Another important figure, the successor of Henle, Leon Kornitzer. Professor Yasha Nemtsov is going to give an entire lecture on him, so I won't say anything except that he was another towering and important figure in the Hamburg scene at the beginning of the 20th century. I will just mention that Leon Kornitzer's important collection of Jewish songs, Jüdische Klange, published in Hamburg in 1933, has our Adonai Melech, the same piece I played for you a few minutes before. But here, he doesn't say it's a Portuguese tune. It's simply a Hamburger Weise. So we see that still in 1933, there were echoes in Hamburg of the Portuguese tradition. I will end to mention something outside the Jewish musical culture, outside the synagogue. Not all Jewish musical culture is synagogue music. There is music in Jewish life, in the Jewish home, in the Jewish community centers, and in this case, in the Jewish youth movements, which was a very important component of the Jewish experience in Germany, particularly during the Weimar Republic. The Jewish youth movements were developed across the lines of the Wandervogel, the German youth movements, with a lot of trips to nature and a lot of idealistic views being transmitted in these groups. Hamburg had a very important part in this history of youth movements, and an important part in the music. You know, singing together during camps was a very important activity, and the songs that were performed were in many cases collected and put in songsters. So here you have Joseph Jola Jacobsen, the very mythical conductor of school choirs in Hamburg. And this photo was taken by Rabbi Zev Walter Gotthold. And I mentioned the memory of Rabbi Gotthold because I had the honor of have met him in person and talked to him about music in Hamburg before the war. This is the only picture I could find of Dr. Rabbi Gotthold. He was a member of the orchestra, and he was an ethnographer, an ethnomusicologist. He helped in this very important publication of Hamburg, what I call the last salvo of Hamburg German-Jewish musical intersection. Havana Shira, this is a songster. You can see how the songs look. I don't have the time to go now into the visual aspects of this songster, which are incredible. Here you have a song for children, a very simple song. You see the German translation, and you see who wrote the song, no less than Abraham Zvi Edelson. So Havana Shira auf Lasst uns singen is a collection, a pamphlet of so many musical sources. I will end then my presentation. By the way, the songster was republished, reprinted in Hamburg in 2001 in a beautiful commented edition, a facsimile edition, and this was an amazing, memorialization of the Jewish youth in Hamburg before the war. Rabbi Gotthold, in a document, unpublished document of the National Library of Israel, writes about his experience in preparing these songsters. And I'm quoting from a quote in an article about by Michael Beckerman and Naomi Tatmor, published in Music and Politics a few years ago. And this is Rabbi Gotthold's memory of this book, Havana Shira. This songbook documents the desire of Jews to remain part of a German cultural life. German folk songs, Hebrew dance melodies, and religious songs stand cheek by jowl in the collation. The editors wanted to integrate various cultures without excluding the song because of its outward appearance. With insight, this cultural political myopia might be ascribed to an attitude still obsessed with the Weimar spirit. He's referring here to the inclusion of very nationalist German songs, student songs from the medieval period, etc. It must seem strange nowadays that such an educationally motivated cultural policy should have been considered justifiable after the Nazi takeover and the exclusion of Jews from German cultural life. Remember, Havana Shira is published in 1935, 2 years after Hitler came to power. From this point of view, Havana Shira is an extraordinary historical document. At the same time, we felt that we could justify our pride and determination in this context by viewing our cultural balancing act as a symbolic fusion of Judaism and the German spirit. Thank you very much.
We will